stay there. You sent in some articles about the stock market and some unusual stuff happening.
Yeah.
It looks like things are getting kind of spicy, especially with, that surprise 2-day dip right before we get that big inflation report and the Fed's interest rate decision.
Yeah. No kidding.
Well, what's your take on all of this?
It's a really interesting time, for sure. You're right. The S&P 500, the Dow, and the NASDAQ closing lower for 2 days in a row.
Yeah,
That's unusual.
it is.
It hasn't happened in weeks. But, before we all freak out, let's step back and look at the bigger picture.
Okay, so where are we at for the year overall?
Well, all three major indexes are still showing some really significant gains for the year. We're talking over 26% for the S&P 500.
Wow.
That's huge.
Yeah.
So this dip might just be like a pause in a much larger upward trend.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like everyone's holding their breath to see what happens with inflation and how the Fed reacts. Can you break down why this inflation report has everyone so on edge?
Sure. So inflation is a bit of a wild card right now because it can really impact the Fed's decisions about interest rates.
Hmm.
And for anyone who's not totally familiar with interest rates, they basically determine the cost of borrowing money.
Okay.
So when rates are low, businesses are more likely to invest and grow, which helps stimulate the economy.
Right.
So the Fed has been cutting rates to encourage this growth. But if inflation starts to rise too quickly, they might have to raise rates to try to cool things down.
And that could throw some cold water on the market's enthusiasm, huh?
Exactly. Investors have been really enjoying this ride with these low rates, so a sudden increase could spook the market.
Yeah, especially with so much uncertainty already swirling around.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like the Fed is in a tough spot right now.
Yeah.
Cut rates, too much inflation could take off,
Right.
but raise them and the economy might slow down.
Yeah. Tough choices.
What are analysts predicting for the Fed meeting next week?
Well, most analysts seem to be leaning towards another rate cut, which would actually be the third one this year.
Wow.
So that really shows how committed the Fed is to keeping the economy going. But they are walking a tightrope, trying to find that balance between supporting growth and keeping inflation under control.
Yeah, and this upcoming inflation report could really shake things up if those numbers come in higher than expected.
What? Absolutely.
The sources you sent over mentioned economists are predicting increases kind of similar to last month. Do you think that would be enough to make the Fed maybe think twice about another rate cut?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The Fed is really focused on keeping inflation under control.
Oh, okay.
So if the report shows prices jumping up a lot, especially more than they're expecting, it could give them pause.
Right.
However, if the numbers are pretty much in line with those forecasts, they might just go ahead with another cut to keep things moving.
Okay, so we've got this big economic drama unfolding, but
Right.
let's zoom in on some of the companies who are caught in the middle of it all.
Okay.
You sent a report about Oracle, the tech giant taking a pretty big hit after their earnings report.
Right.
What happened there?
Well, their earnings report didn't really meet the expectations that analysts had set, which kind of sent their stock price tumbling. It seems like their growth, while still pretty significant, wasn't as impressive as some had hoped for, even with, the huge demand for their AI cloud services.
So are they kind of becoming a victim of their own success?
That's possible.
Because if the expectations are that high, it must be tough to keep exceeding them every single time.
Yeah, that's a great point. When a company is consistently putting out strong results, the market starts to expect even more.
Right.
And that creates this constant pressure to outperform, which can be really tough to keep up.
It wasn't all bad news for companies, though.
True.
We also saw that Alaska Air is soaring,
Literally.
pun intended,
Yep.
after raising their profit forecast. What's fueling their success?
Well, they seem to be riding the wave of this boom in holiday travel, and they're making some strategic moves by expanding with new international routes.
Okay, they're also benefiting from Boeing's comeback.
Oh, yeah, speaking of comebacks, Boeing has officially resumed production of their 737 MAX planes
They have.
after that very turbulent period.
Yeah.
What does this mean for Boeing moving forward?
This is a really big moment for Boeing.
Yeah.
The 737 MAX is their flagship aircraft.
Right.
So getting production back on track is crucial for their, financial health. It also kind of signals that airlines and passengers are starting to feel more confident about the 737 MAX.
Right.
Which is huge for them to move forward.
It really is a pretty remarkable turnaround for Boeing, considering everything that's happened.
Yeah.
And with Alaska Air, expanding internationally, it seems like the travel industry is really betting on that continued growth.
It seems that way.
Are they looking to compete with those major global airlines?
Well, their expansion does suggest a certain level of ambition, right? They seem
Yeah.
to be focusing on that Asia-Pacific region.
Which is a smart move, I think, considering, the projected growth in that market.
Hmm.
But going global comes with its own set of challenges.
Right.
They'll be up against some really established players.
Yeah.
And they'll have to navigate all those complex international regulations.
Oh, yeah.
It'll be really interesting to see how they adapt and carve out their own space.
It makes you wonder if this could be like a sign of things to come for other airlines.
Yeah.
You think we'll see more regional carriers trying to get a piece of that international travel pie?
It wouldn't surprise me. The demand is definitely there, and regional airlines might see this as their chance to, grab a share of that growing market.
Uh-huh.
But it's a risky move, for sure.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of investment and a really solid strategy to stand out in such a crowded field.
Speaking of interesting moves, we saw that Toll Brothers, the luxury home builder, they actually beat their earnings estimates.
Yeah, they did.
But then their stock price still went down.
Uh-huh.
That seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does on the surface, but you got to remember the stock market is all about trying to anticipate future performance.
Right.
So investors might be looking beyond these good earnings and thinking about the long-term outlook for luxury housing,
Okay.
with the possibility of interest rates going up.
Uh-huh.
Some investors might be a little hesitant about whether those high-end home sales can really keep going strong.
So it all comes back to those like bigger economic forces we talked about earlier.
Exactly.
It's like this intricate dance between the overall economy and how individual companies are doing.
Yeah, precisely. And we can't forget about the global context.
Right.
Some of the sources you sent also mentioned what's happening overseas. Chinese stocks had a mixed day after some not-so-great export data came out, which could mean some trouble for their economy.
Yeah.
And European markets are also showing signs of anxiety with the European Central Bank's meeting coming up.
It's crazy how much is happening globally
Yeah.
that can directly impact our markets here.
It's
It can feel like a whirlwind just trying to keep up with it all.
Yeah, the global economy is so interconnected
Right.
that what happens in one part of the world can ripple out and affect the markets everywhere.
Uh-huh.
That's why it's so important to stay informed
Yeah.
and try to, understand these larger trends.
So for our listener out there trying to navigate this really complex financial world,
Yeah.
what would you say is the most important thing for them to remember?
Well, I think the market is in constant flux.
Okay.
There's a mix of positive momentum, but also some uncertainties on the horizon.
Right.
We've seen some really impressive gains this year,
Uh-huh.
but things like inflation and those potential interest rate hikes
Right.
could make things a bit bumpy.
Yeah.
I don't think it's time to panic or anything,
Okay.
but it's definitely time to be informed and prepared.
Yeah.
Understanding these market forces and how they affect different companies,
Uh-huh.
that's key to making good financial decisions.
I think that's really good advice. It's easy to get caught up in those day-to-day ups and downs,
It is.
but it's so important to step back and see that bigger picture.
Absolutely.
What else would you recommend our listener keep in mind?
Well, I think adaptability is really important right now.
Okay.
Having a well-diversified portfolio,
Uh-huh.
that's always a good idea,
Right.
but it's especially important in this current environment.
Okay.
And, don't be afraid to make changes as things evolve.
Yeah, so much has changed even in just the last few months. It feels like the only thing that's for sure is that things are going to keep changing.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed.
Right.
Don't just react to the headlines. Dig a little deeper. Understand, the why behind the what. And think critically about the information you're reading and hearing.
I totally agree. It's been a really fascinating deep dive today.
Yeah.
We've covered everything from that recent dip in the stock market to the Fed's interest rate decision coming up.
Right.
We even looked at how some specific companies like Oracle and Alaska Air and Boeing are handling all of this.
Yeah, it's been a whirlwind of financial news.
It really has.
But I think our listener is walking away with a much better understanding of what's going on,
Yeah,
Remember, knowledge is power, especially when it comes to your money.
absolutely. And to our listener out there, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into all the ups and downs of the market. Keep sending us those sources and we'll keep you informed and entertained along the way. Until next time.